Good morning, grasshoppers. It's Friday and it's raining and it's not too cold though. So you're going to have a fairly decent 3 or 4 days and then it's going to get cold again. In any event, I wanted to take this opportunity and chat with you about the assignments that you have for this coming week. And I wanted to share with you that the chapter 6 in Justice is on John Rawls, who happens to be one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. His work on theory of justice and the subsequent book that he wrote that dealt with some of the criticisms of his theory are just seminal works, and all graduate students are required to read John Rawls, and most undergraduate philosophy students, especially if you're a philosophy major, have to read John Rawls. So I have set up the quiz to reflect that you have read and studied this chapter. I will share with you that this particular chapter is very important as a sort of extension of chapter 5 in Sandel's Justice. So one of the things that uh, John Rawls is arguing is justice is fairness, and the particular mechanisms that he has to bring that about are just very important. We have that challenge in our culture of almost a rise towards an economic totalitarianism and the injustice of the system that we have inaugurated in our country of moral desert and all of that type of thing premised on our latent abilities and the benefits of birth and all of those types of things. And so what Rawls is trying to do is to argue a mechanism that would uh, diminish or eliminate some of those injustices. So I think it's important to, as you're reading through this chapter, to keep in mind that what Rawls is arguing is the notion of injustice. How do we remedy that? Ironically enough, there are those thinkers, and I happen to be one of them, who argue that Rawls takes his fundamental ideas from Karl Marx, and that what communism, according to Marx, is really intended to do is to alleviate the injustices of the economic and social and political order that were existent in his time. So if you can sort of think out of the box and look at Rawls as an attempt to reconcile the injustices that we have in our culture and in our society and in our political system, then I think that chapter 6 will come across as more amenable for you. Sandel makes a wonderful comment at the end of the chapter that Rawls, that his work is some of the most seminal work that's been done in the whole political philosophy archive that we have, and I happen to agree with him. It's I think that Rawls makes some errors, but I also think that his work is so critically important to inaugurate a thinking about the injustices and how can we resolve that? How can we remedy some of that? And when we look at our contemporary political leaders, so to speak, in the Congress and the Senate and the White House, one wonders if they have any kind of notion of resolving or remedying the gross injustice that goes on in our society. So I just want you to be aware that that is the thematic foundation of this chapter, and it's important that you understand that when we look at business as, is it fair? In the chapter, they're talking about Uncle Milty, Milton Friedman. I always like Uncle Milty. It's what we learned him as an undergrad. And Milton Friedman was a critical read back in the day, and probably ought to still be read. His book on Free to Choose. Major thinkers in terms of the time frame that I think are still relevant. The other assignment that you have is on Hannah Arendt, and that's the way you pronounce her name, Hannah Arendt. And Arendt is famous as a philosopher for her work on totalitarianism. And it seemed to me that this would be an appropriate article for you to read in light of Chapter 6 for John Rawls and the particular positions that she's wielding here in terms of loneliness as a criterion for a totalitarian state. And so here again, I want you to read through this article with that notion of what are the underpinnings of totalitarianism? How does it come about? And what are the legitimizations for it? I think that these are critical, philosophical, and ethical notions that you ought to be aware of. So the quiz that I've generated is all essay. And I think there are 8 or 9 questions in the quiz. But what I'm going to be looking for is well thought responses that are a reflection of what the article is sharing with you and what you're learning from reading this article that I happen to think are very, very important. I will share with you that I am a big fan of Hannah Arendt's work. I've read a considerable amount of her work, and her exposés and explorations into Nazism as a totalitarian phenomena and Stalinism as a totalitarian phenomena are absolutely critical. And there are those thinkers who argue that the United States, for example, could be one slippery slope away from a totalitarian state. And I am very concerned that some of the stuff that's going on today in our society, the attempt to, for example, capture Governor Whitmer and ultimately execute her and take over the state and things of that nature, when we look at those phenomena, the notions that Hannah Arendt is positing for us become very, very important. So those are the 2 assignments you have, and the reading is something you're going to want to jump on. You're not going to want to wait, to get started on this stuff. You're going to want to go through John Rawls carefully, if not twice, and you're going to want to probably do the same thing with Hannah Arendt's article. So, if you have any questions, drop me a line. I think that this week you're going to be busy, and but it's certainly not something that you can't handle. And I think that Sandel's chapter is very straightforward, so you ought not to have any problem with that. Just make sure you read it. That is so critical. Please make sure you read this. If you try to attempt the quizzes, in the absence of reading and studying this material, you're just going to flounder. And I'm looking for some very good stuff on this Hannah Arendt quiz. So, once again, I hope that you're all being careful and that the corona has not invaded your life. It's pretty evident that it's expanding in the area now. I was stunned. I read the report in the news this morning that in Illinois they're having 4,000 cases a day now. It's just absolutely crazy what's going on. So you need to be careful. You need to keep your social distance. You need to wear your mask. And I'll talk to you soon.